too. It doesn't matter what insurance you have when your local hospital closes. And with this budget, hospitals will close, clinics will close. This will be a catastrophe for all of us. We will all have less access to health care. It's incredibly dangerous. But I don't want us to lose sight of the human impact of this. As this bill gets closer to becoming the law of the land, I can't stop thinking about my patients. I see their faces, the faces of the mothers and the families I've taken care of who got their health insurance through Medicaid. Do they not matter? Are they somehow less important? Where are they supposed to go to get health care? 80 million Americans get their health insurance through Medicaid. Almost half of all American children get their coverage through Medicaid. What are you doing? Where is your humanity? What is the most chilling and soul-crushing part of this entire process is that the Republican majority doesn't care. They don't care. And this isn't speculative. It isn't being presumptuous or guessing about their intentions. They are literally telling us. The Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, called gutting Medicaid minutia and kicking millions of Americans off their health insurance immaterial. Republican Senator Mitch McConnell said Americans who are concerned about losing Medicaid will, quote, get over it. Republican Senator Joni Ernst defended the life-threatening gutting of Medicaid by saying, well, we're all going to die. As we sit here today, I am outraged by what Republicans are doing to future generations. I never want to hear Republicans say that they are the party of families ever again. Half of all children in the United States of America get their health care coverage through Medicaid. 1 in every 4 children in the United States of America get food assistance through SNAP. Republicans are taking away health care and food from our children in order to prioritize billionaires and perpetuate wealth inequality. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's unconscionable. We haven't even begun to unpack all the ways in which this bill is a moral abomination and honestly an embarrassment of a piece of legislation. If you were serious about putting together a good budget for the American people, you wouldn't try to shove it through on an artificial deadline. You wouldn't force debate through the dark cover of night. You wouldn't vote on it without even reading the text of the bill. But the Republican majority is just unquestioningly doing the president's bidding. They have ceded all of their power to the president, who is beholden to his billionaire class. The more the American people learn about this bill, the more they hate it. You've seen the polls, you've received the calls and emails. You know the American people don't want it. That's why I'm submitting an amendment to scrap the whole bill. Listen to the people you were sent here to represent. So let's start over, write a bill for the American people, not the billionaires. Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Amo, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member and distinguished members of this committee. Look, we all know the saying. We've heard it a bunch of times today, probably. Budgets are a statement of values. You know, this has guided me through this process, this long process that we've been on, and a big, bad process I think it's been. 126 days ago in February, 82 days ago in April, and 40 days ago in May, the House voted on some form of this Republican scheme that would take the health care and food assistance away from millions to pay for tax breaks for the rich. Republican members in this chamber have had opportunity after opportunity to debate how to avoid hurting millions of people. You've had a chance, countless chances to improve this bill, to state values. From the Budget Committee to the Rules Committee, I've been sounding the alarm alongside my Democratic colleagues. You know, we pulled a college-style all-nighter to demand Republicans listen to these values we share, values that I hear at home in Rhode Island. Yet, here we are, July 1st, 2025, once again voting on this big, bad bill for billionaires. Has it gotten any better? Nope. Republicans have undoubtedly made it worse. And every step of the way, every vote we've taken, every debate they've participated in, Republicans have been faced with a question. Does this budget reflect your values? And every single time, whether or not they've said it, they've answered with a resounding yes. Republicans value the wealthy over the working class. Republicans value tax breaks for billionaires over health care for the vulnerable. Time and time again, Republicans have refused to correct this reverse Robin Hood scheme. And I proudly voted no over and over in committee and on the floor, but Republicans refuse to join us. And we'll try, I guess, through this process to make this bad blueprint to bolster billionaires a little less bad. Republicans are stealing from the poor to give to the rich, period. It's immoral. And as such, I've introduced an amendment, Amendment 139, to raise the top tax rate back to 39.6%. This amendment fulfills a request from President Trump himself months ago. I'm not sure he knew what he was doing when he put it out there, but he called for raising taxes on millionaires. Let's do it. This bill also pushes the dream of higher education further out of reach for millions of Americans. So I introduced Amendment 130. I think it originally saw light in the Senate with one of my home state senators, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, to index the maximum Pell Grant to inflation. This amendment honors the legacy of a great Rhode Islander, Senator Claiborne Pell, by ensuring vulnerable Americans and Rhode Islanders and students throughout the country can climb the ladder of success. This bill would rip away health insurance from nearly 17 million Americans. I introduced Amendment 96 to block implementation of these dangerous policies until we confirm and have certainty that Medicaid enrollees won't lose coverage. Pretty common sense. We've heard over and over and over again, this bill does not take Medicaid away from a single person. Well, after all of that insistence, if you pass this amendment, you will make it the case that not a single person will lose coverage. This is a common sense amendment. But let's be very clear, with no ambiguity, this bill takes 17 million Americans off of Medicaid, no matter how you slice it. Now, we also know that this bill would gut the tax policies that spurred a clean energy boom throughout the country. This will increase Rhode Islanders, people in the Northeast, people across this country already sky-high energy bills and eliminate thousands of jobs. So I introduced Amendment 106. I know this also was led in the Senate by another one of my senators, Jack Reed, and it blocks bad policies from taking effect until we confirm electricity prices will not be increased for any American household. Make a commitment to the American people that the priorities that Republicans have put forth for months and months and months that they've articulated actually have a potential of seeing the light of day. But I don't think that will be the case. And this bill would eliminate two taxes on gun silencers, short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns. This would make Americans less safe from gun violence and cost $1.7 billion over 10 years. There is no better definition of a lose-lose. And yet, this found its way into this big, ugly bill. So I'm proud to co-lead Congressman Mike Thompson's Amendment 146, which would strike this dangerous and expensive provision. These amendments won't solve everything. They will blunt the brunt of the big, bad bill's betrayal for the American people. So I'll leave you with this. This bill is worse now. I'm an emphatic hell no, and I beg you, vote no. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Ansari, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since 8 a.m. this morning, I have been leading a read-in for our future, joined by students, joined by labor unions, joined by advocates, other members of Congress, to read the almost 1,000 pages of the big, ugly bill and expose just how cruel and egregious it is. I have spent all day hosting readers for this. We started outside the Capitol. Now people are still downstairs trying to get through this bill, and it still is going to take another couple of hours. So to my Republican colleagues, I have a genuine question for you. I'm sure all of your constituents would like to know, have you read this bill? I mean, have you taken the time to even try to look at it, try to skim it? I mean, new text came out today. And if you have, does all of us being here right now, sitting here, mean that you're okay with everything that's in it? Are you okay with millions of people losing their health care as a result of this bill? Are you okay with people losing their homes as a result of this bill? Are you okay with millions of jobs being lost because of the clean energy rollbacks? Are you okay with billions of dollars going to ICE to rip families away from one another, to allow and enable Donald Trump to continue to break the law and to cement himself as a dictator of what is now an authoritarian regime. Either way, honestly, I don't know which one is worse, but I know that either way, your constituents and Americans deserve so much better than this. I'm here today offering 9 amendments to mitigate the drastic impacts that this bill would have in this country. I would like to highlight 3 of those amendments. My first amendment would prevent the natural resources title of this bill from taking effect until all subsidies for the fossil fuel industry are eliminated from the federal government. By even the most conservative estimates, the federal government gives $20.5 billion of fossil fuel subsidies to big oil annually. But Americans are not getting a fair return on their investment. In fiscal year 2022, direct subsidies to big oil exceeded revenue by $2.1 billion. Beyond dollars, the human toll of the climate crisis is staggering. Extreme heat, which is a deadly issue in my district, is already claiming 1,300 lives annually. By the way, extreme heat actually kills more people than tornadoes, floods, and the majority of natural disasters combined. Researchers estimate that if we continue to heavily rely on fossil fuels, extreme heat deaths could rise to 26,575 lives lost annually. We have to turn away from fossil fuels. They're a bad investment for our future, both from a fiscal and a human health perspective. I'm also offering an amendment that would require the Secretary of Interior and Comptroller General to ensure that this bill would not result in increased energy costs for Americans. Instead of investing in clean, renewable energy, Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are using this big, ugly bill to continue giving handouts to big oil and fossil fuel polluters at the expense of working families. I serve on the Natural Resources Committee. We have had a number of hearings titled Unleashing American Energy Dominance. But then when you get into the weeds of it, there's no discussion of renewable energy. There's all of this talk about unleashing oil and gas all across the country when we already produce more oil and gas than any country in the world at any point in our history. At a time when energy prices are soaring and so many Americans are struggling to pay their bills, the last thing that we should be doing is enacting policies that will increase energy prices even further. Unfortunately, that's exactly what this bill does. If my Republican colleagues are serious about lowering costs for Americans, they should have no problem supporting my amendment to ensure that this bill does not result in higher energy costs before it takes effect. And lastly, I'm submitting an amendment that would utilize any alleged savings made by cuts to education funding to fill budget shortfalls in the Pell Grant program. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the Pell Grant program will have a shortfall of about $2.7 billion at the end of fiscal year 2025, which would widen to $9.9 billion by the end of 2026. It would then widen by $7 billion every year. This big, ugly bill tries to solve this problem by stripping Pell Grant eligibility from single parents and workers who need to go to school part-time. Pell Grants make getting a degree possible for people, for rural families, working families, students who are the first in their families to ever be able to go to college. These are future teachers and nurses and doctors and innovators. We cannot make school even more unaffordable and out of reach for them. This bill is a massive step backward for our future. It sells out our communities, guts our healthcare, and slashes programs that millions of Americans depend on. Letting this bill pass will be a death sentence for many in this country. And the fact that you can all sit here so callously, not caring at all, and doing whatever it is that Donald Trump tells you to do is disgusting. I yield back.
Representative Espaillat, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. The American people will probably see this exercise and consider it to be an exercise in futility, that dozens of members of Congress come before this committee, they present meritorious amendments to make this bill better, and they're not heard. But in fact, I don't feel that. It is a collective testimony of where we stand on this bill. And this bill does not live up to the promises that Republicans made to the American people. Americans were told once, twice, 3 times forever that Medicaid was safe from cuts. Instead, we see provisions that will cause millions of Americans to lose their health care and millions more to pay higher premiums and copays. Americans were told that Republicans were putting power back in the hands of states, but we see policies that would attempt to control how states decide to use their own state funding. Americans were told that this bill will reduce the deficit and restore the middle class, and yet we see instead this bill would allow for millions in tax cuts to the very wealthy and add trillions of dollars to the national debt. So this is a collective testimony that we're putting forward today that shows how the Republican Party has failed the American people. And several hundred amendments have been brought forward, including 112 amendments from members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which I'm proud to chair. I have introduced 3 amendments, Madam Chair. Amendment 312 will require a study on how Medicaid cuts will impact safety net hospitals and federally qualified health centers that provide services to medically underserved communities. Now, that's so important because they will get disproportionately hurt by these cuts. These safety net hospitals will potentially have to close. And so we must measure the level of hurt that this betrayal will perpetrate against the American people. Medicaid cuts are not just obviously harmful to patients, but they are also detrimental to healthcare facilities that predominantly serve Medicaid and Medicare recipients. Now, I have 488,000 Medicaid recipients in my district. This will severely hurt more than half, much more than half of the district. Many of them are seniors, children, women that relied on Medicaid and will see this program gutted. In the district, there are 18 funded healthcare centers, federally funded healthcare centers that provide services to over 1 million people every year. So this will devastate the district, this will devastate the country, but ultimately, this is a collective testimony that we're putting forward that unmasks the betrayal of the Republican Party to the American people on the pledges that you made, that you would not cut Medicaid. And in fact, we're seeing that you're devastating it. I've also introduced Amendment 282, which will require also a study on SNAP cuts, the biggest cuts in SNAP history. Yeah, this bill is big, all right. It's the biggest cut in healthcare in the history of our country. It's the biggest cut in food stamps in the history of our country. And it's the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the richest in America. So this bill is big, all right, in those 3 categories. And the cuts in SNAP will not only hurt recipients, but it will hurt small businesses, grocery stores, bodega owners that rely, in many cases, 50% of their business is through food stamps, the SNAP program. So they will be hurt. Small businesses, grocers, not just in cities, but in rural areas as well. And finally, Madam Chair, I have Amendment 320, which will prohibit funds from being used to conduct immigration enforcement in houses of worship, in churches, in synagogues and temples across America. You should not be afraid to be arrested and deported when you go pray to your God. 65% of the American people believe so. These are the 3 amendments. People don't want this bill. I urge the adoption of the amendments. And I yield back.
Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for being here to listen to us after a very long day. Y'all, I'm at the Rules Committee for the 2nd time this Congress to try and fix the billionaire bailout budget, the most expensive single bill in American history, transferring wealth from working people to billionaires. I thought back in May that this bill just couldn't get any worse, but the Senate said, just wait. And they actually proved me wrong because the bill is actually worse. The first time the House debated and passed this bill, my Republican colleagues tried to hide it from the American people, debating it in the middle of the night, hoping that folks back home wouldn't notice what they were doing. This time, their cruelty has been on display in broad daylight all day long. My Republican colleagues are forcing a bill through that, Madam Chair, most of your colleagues haven't read this bill. They're voting to take food from the mouths of millions of families without even reading the bill. Democrats and Republican families alike who rely on SNAP, and y'all need to understand that the reliance on SNAP and the strain on food banks, they serve meals to millions across this country, not my constituents, but across all districts. When SNAP is slashed, food banks feel the pain in real time. Higher demand, increased strain on volunteers and donated supplies. This would make a bad situation worse for food banks across the country, including the Atlanta Community Food Bank in my district, which is already struggling after a $15 million funding cut following the defunding of local food purchase assistant cooperative agreement programs under this Republican administration. But I need to be clear, just because the Atlanta Community Food Bank is headquartered in my district, it serves 14 districts across the state. I was hoping that my colleagues from Georgia would have been here when I had an opportunity to speak, because in the 3rd Congressional District of Georgia, the Atlanta Community Food Bank serves people there. And I know that some of my other Republican colleagues in Georgia, 4 of them, also are served by the Atlanta Community Food Bank. Real people, like my constituent Denisha, will suffer, Madam Chair. Denisha is among the 1.4 million people who receive SNAP benefits in Georgia. She's a mother of 5, already struggling on SNAP just to make ends meet. I had an opportunity to talk with Denisha because she contacted my office after she discovered that her SNAP benefits were missing from her EBT card. Denisha says that she will do anything to feed her kids. That sounds like any and every mama that I know. Denisha turned to food pantries to help her family, and she told me food pantries are struggling too right now, and they could not even help me to feed my family. When SNAP is threatened, food banks are often the only place families can turn. So today, I propose an amendment adding a food bank relief fund to the bill. My amendment would appropriate $25 billion to the Emergency Food Assistance Program, supporting food banks that so many people turn to in these uncertain times. That's only a drop in the bucket compared to the billionaire tax cuts. The Food Bank Relief Fund is just one of the 18 amendments that I'm leading today. This moment will go down in history, no matter what path my Republican colleagues choose. I've chosen to fight for the people in my district who've called me day and night to ask me to oppose this bill. But make no mistake, this bill is not about cracking down on fraud or waste or abuse, because we're all against that. It's about taking food from children and seniors who depend on SNAP and ripping away the health care from nearly 17 million Americans who need Medicaid. Although I know my Republican colleagues will refuse to change their billionaire bailout budget and accept any of these amendments, I'll continue to bring the voice of the American people that would be harmed by this bill into the debate. Y'all, I came to Congress to serve the people, and I've heard from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle claiming that they're here to serve the people as well. But the Republican budget abandons them. These are real people, not line items in a budget. Families who rely on SNAP to keep their children fed, seniors choosing between food and medical treatments, veterans already without stable housing. Instead of delivering for them and the promise of America, you're giving tax breaks to billionaires. That's not public service, it's betrayal. So when you go home to your districts, you'll have to answer for it. I know I'm going to answer to my constituents that I'm fighting for. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Bonamici, you're recognized.
Thank you to the chair and the ranking member, and thank you to the Rules Committee for being here and for listening to us today. I want to first align myself with so many excellent amendments that are designed to stop the harm that will come from these devastating cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. I met with hospital leaders, the Hospital Association, the leaders of the community health clinics. The word that they agreed was applicable is catastrophic. 97% of Oregonians have insurance, and that is because we have been very innovative and forward with Medicaid expansion, and 1 in 3 Oregonians, including many children, get their health care through Medicaid. But I want to talk about a couple of other issues that are in this big bad bill that are not getting as much attention. The first is my amendment number 348 about student loans. This bill is a sweeping, calculated assault on American families, on students, and on institutes of higher education that give people the opportunity to be educated. This bill attacks higher education, making it even more expensive for students and their families. It eliminates PLUS loans. It modifies repayment plans to remove some of the lowest cost options for borrowers. Monthly student loan payments will increase dramatically. So my amendment, number 348, provides a necessary protection for existing student loan borrowers who are shortchanged under this terrible bill. These borrowers made important life-changing decisions based on the loan programs and repayment plans that were available to them at the time. They should not have to have unfavorable loan terms forced on them just to pay for Republican tax cuts for billionaires. So if left unchanged, this bill will set more borrowers up to fail. As written, it will dramatically increase the number of borrowers who will default. None of us want that. It's not good for borrowers, it's not good for the economy, and it's not good for the country. So I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment to honor the promise that's made to student loan borrowers and allow them to remain in their current plans. My second amendment I'd like to speak in favor of is number 436, and this strips the so-called institutional accountability provisions. The damage doesn't stop with student borrowers. It slams doors of opportunity shut for those who need it most. So in addition to making colleges and universities less affordable, this bill targets specific programs of study based on ignorant and arbitrary low-earning outcomes. Although the Senate's accountability proposal is unquestionably better for schools than the House's so-called risk-sharing plan, I'm glad that's out, the Senate's bill would discriminate against programs that lead to careers in valuable but perhaps low-paying fields, especially in public service and the arts. What if a student wants to join the Peace Corps or become an early childhood educator? These are fields with low salaries, but that doesn't mean the work isn't valuable or that the students didn't benefit from their education. An analysis from the Urban Institute found that programs in human development, health and medical, administrative services, human services, and teacher education, they will all see the greatest losses. Madam Chair, people should not be punished for choosing service over salary. My amendment would strike this harmful provision so colleges and universities will not be penalized for the career paths their graduates choose to pursue. If my colleagues are truly interested in accountability for higher education, they can support gainful employment and the 90-10 rule. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and end the assault on these valuable educational programs that make our country stronger, more innovative, and more competitive. The next two amendments are related. One is from Ranking Member Scott, and the other is mine, because this bill doesn't just fail students, it fails children and families. So Mr. Scott's Amendment 279 and my Amendment 388 stop American children from going hungry. Federal nutrition programs, including WIC, SNAP, school meals, and more, are investments in the health, learning, and development of children and young adults across the country. There's no excuse for slashing lifelines to children in need. Every congressional district is home to people facing hunger. Now is not the time to be making everyday life harder for American families and taking away vital nutrition support. These amendments are pro-family, pro-children, pro-mom, unlike the rest of the big, bad, ugly bill. Finally, I'm supporting 3 amendments from that I'm working on and co-sponsoring with Representative Magaziner, having to do with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I know how important NOAA is. But this bill sabotages safety and puts Americans directly in harm's way. So these amendments will strike provisions that gut NOAA and kneecap our ability to forecast weather, protect coastal communities, and maintain the very sanctuaries that sustain our fisheries, economy, and way of life. Rescinding funds for NOAA's permitting and reviews will delay overdue projects that are designed to blunt the worst extreme weather events and harm coastal economies. And stripping support for community resilience will leave families defenseless against rising seas and billion-dollar disasters. Cutting research means we'll fly blind into the next hurricane, heat wave, or harmful algal bloom event. This bill is like cutting off the fire hose during a 5-alarm fire. In summary, I didn't think this bill could get worse, but it did. It's regressive and reckless and strips healthcare, food assistance from millions. It's legislative malpractice, and history will remember those who stood up for those in need and those who voted to burn it all down. I yield back.
Ms. Goodlander, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member McGovern. I am here tonight before this committee once again because this is the last committee, the only committee standing in between the people who I work for, the hardworking people of New Hampshire, and this big bill. And I brought the bill with me tonight because you might call me old-fashioned, but I read every bill we vote on in this body. We've had this text for less than 12 hours. And yet here we are tonight, once again in the dead of night, pushing this big, brutal bill across the finish line in an arbitrary deadline. This bill is 887 pages. Even if you don't read this whole bill, which every member of this body should, it should catch your attention that it includes the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. It's a beautiful bill only for one group of people, and that is the billionaires who are going to make out like bandits with tax giveaways galore, tax giveaways that they don't need. For the rest of America, this is a brutal bill. Its brutality is measured in the trillions of taxpayer dollars that this bill is going to add to our already sky-high national debt. Its brutality is going to be measured in the costs that millions of fellow Americans will pay in dollars and in their lives that are going to be upended by this bill. Look, we had very little time, way less time than any deliberative body should have to introduce amendments. I've introduced common sense amendments that try to go directly to the costs that this bill is going to impose on millions and millions of Americans. Energy costs and housing costs, healthcare costs and food costs. But what I want to say tonight is that when we vote on this bill, I hope every member of this body will keep in their minds and in their hearts the real costs, the real human beings who are going to pay the price. The little boy in the town of Boscawen, whose life depends on Medicaid and on SNAP, and whose life is going to be forever changed by this bill. He will be in my heart and on my mind when we vote on this bill. The cancer survivor in the city of Keene, who literally would not be here today if this bill, this big, brutal bill, were law today. She will be in my heart and on my mind. The patriotic healthcare providers in the North Country of my state who've come to me with tears in their eyes because they know that this bill is going to shut down critical access hospitals and people will die. They will be in my heart. And so too will the extraordinary people I sat with this afternoon. The last thing I did before I came down here to this committee was to sit with a group of extraordinary people who are trying to do the Lord's work in providing health care to those who need it most. They will be in my mind and in my heart as we vote on this bill. I hope you will read every word. I hope that the absence of our Republican colleagues here tonight is not evidence that they are not paying attention to the harm that this bill is going to wreak on our country. I urge this committee to adopt the common sense amendments that have been put forth tonight, but no amendments can fix the damage that this bill is going to cause to our country, and that is why I'm a hard no. With that, I yield back.
Thanks to all of our witnesses. Mr. Austin, do you have any questions you would like to ask? I'm sorry, Mr. Scott. Yep, Mr. Scott. Mr. McGovern.
I just want to thank all of you for being here. Your words are powerful, and I think it reflects what the American people are thinking right now. I think people are really scared and frightened, and especially those who have benefited from some of the programs that seem to be targeted. So we will do everything we can on this committee to be wind at your backs to try to advocate for your amendments. I'm not going to ask any questions, but I do want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter that a letter we just received from the Congressional Budget Office, basically telling us that this big, awful bill got more expensive. Since coming, it has added an additional $110 billion to the Senate, original Senate bill. So now, it would increase the deficits by over $3.4 trillion, not $3.3 trillion. So every time we deal with this, it gets more expensive. So in any event, I ask unanimous consent.
Without
And I
objection.
thank you again. I yield back.
Thanks. Mr. Griffith. Okay, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. I just want to echo the ranking member's thanks to all of you. The passion which you have brought to this discussion, and each of you telling the stories of your constituents and trying to help people understand the problems with this bill, each of you in a different way. I think together the tapestry is really, really powerful. I know some folks took some unusual measures to make sure that everybody knows what's in the bill, and that's a huge undertaking as well. So thank you, everyone, for all your work. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Neguse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. I would echo the sentiments of the ranking member and Representative Scanlon with respect to thanking the witnesses for their impassioned testimony, and certainly believe all of their amendments should be considered by the committee. Hope springs eternal that perhaps we'll be able to convince our colleagues in the majority to consider them. I guess one note that I think bears mentioning, and it's in response to Dr. Morrison's testimony, just because it's rare that we have an opportunity to have someone whom has spent her entire career serving patients and ultimately closest to the people whom will be devastated by this bill. I'm curious if you've heard from hospitals in Minnesota in the last, I guess, 24 hours here, 12 hours since the passage of the Senate bill. And the reason I ask that question is I've certainly heard from Colorado hospitals, and we're kind of collating a lot of these statements that are now being issued this evening and earlier today from hospital associations across the country. I was just reading one from Virginia and just detailing the impacts to Southeast and Southwest Virginia, in particular the rural hospitals that are going to be closing if the Senate language ultimately is signed into law. So I wonder if that's consistent with what you're hearing?
Well, it certainly is. And I think it reflects everyone's experience. The hospitals in my district and across the state of Minnesota are literally panicking. Some of the there are two kind of main safety net hospitals in Minneapolis, and they both are concerned that they will have to shut their doors. And the implications for the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, the state, the region, are catastrophic. We've used the word catastrophic a few times tonight. So yes, I've been hearing from hospitals, from providers, from patients, panic.
Well, I've heard the same, and it's all the more reason why I think your amendment ought to be adopted. I also look forward to the debate on the floor tomorrow, because there are a number of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who made a lot of noise in advance of the Senate's consideration of this bill, making the case that the Senate's approach to hospital provider fees was in their view, far less compassionate approach. And there are many of our colleagues who signed letters to that effect, directed to members of the United States Senate, Republican members of the House, who made the case that they simply could not support the approach that the Senate was taking because it would close rural hospitals in their districts. And now they're going to have an opportunity to perhaps test the adage of, action speaking louder than words, because they'll have an opportunity to vote up or down on this bill, it seems. So in any event, thank you for all the witnesses, and I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez.
Once again, I join and echo the comments about being concerned, as well as the concerns about hospitals, including South Carolina Hospital Association, Louisiana Hospital Association, Kentucky Hospital Association. Like, they're all concerned, and they recognize it. And interestingly enough, some of the associations, like in Kentucky, as well as in South Carolina and North Carolina, they actually point out, we liked the House bill better, right? So now it's back over here as a really bad bill, and the question is, what are the legislators, what are the Congress people going to do here, right? Are they going to stand up for, we didn't like their bill, but at least it wasn't as bad as what the Senate is doing to their own hospitals. And with regards to reading the bill, several of you mentioned that, Representative Ansari, that question actually was asked of the committee ranking members and chairs, and they were here having to testify on a bill that they hadn't had time to read. So you're bringing to light what was in that bill. I think is very important for the American public. Your testimony tonight, bringing to light through your amendments, is very important to the American public. Hopefully everybody is going to watch it and see it, because we're all going to post it and retweet it and repost it. So if you're watching out there and you like what they said, make sure that you're letting your neighbors and friends and family know, so their neighbors, friends, and family won't get kicked off of their Medicaid, their Medicare, their Affordable Care Act, their Women's Reproductive Act, their education loans, everything. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Thank you to our witnesses. You all are excused. Kennedy, Clyde, Frost, Adams, Kamlager, Dove, Wasserman Schultz, Goldman. Alma? I know most of you have been here for a while, and you've heard what I've said before. Your written comments will be put into the record if you give them to us. We ask you to keep your verbal comments to 5 minutes. I don't see Mr. Goldman. He was here earlier. We'll slot him in here. Dr. Adams, if you want to move up one, you don't have to, but you'll be after Mr. Frost. If you or prefer, you can just stay right where you are. Okay. Mr. Kennedy, I think you win the prize for being here the longest, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Patient.
You're recognized.
Duly noted. Duly.
He might have something to say about that after tonight.
Well, I'll get right to it, Chairwoman. Thank you very much. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. Today I offer a critical amendment to strike Section 71-113, which targets and defunds community health centers that provide family planning services, even in states where those services are protected by law. The broader provisions in the underlying legislation, the big ugly bill, include the massive cuts to Medicaid, which would decimate access to care for millions of Americans, particularly low-income women, children, and seniors. In May, when we convened at 1 in the morning in this very room, I sat here the entire night and listened. I listened to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle talk about the implications of this bill. When it was finally my turn to speak around 11 a.m. that morning, I stood up and sounded the alarm, and one by one, so did my Democratic colleagues. We highlighted the consequences of moving forward with this dangerous legislation and exactly who would be harmed in all communities across the country. In response, the Republican majority shoved this legislation through anyway, with many members later claiming they were unaware of what was actually even in the bill. And now here we are again. After the Senate Republicans somehow managed to make this legislation worse, this isn't just the largest health care cut in American history, it's a direct attack on Americans. This legislation cuts more than $1 trillion from Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, leaving nearly 17 million Americans uninsured. As a representative of a community with 285,000 people who depend on these services, including 110,000 children, let me focus on what's at stake with the Medicaid provisions outlined in this bill. Since the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, nearly 25 million Americans nationwide have gained access to care through the Medicaid expansion. That means moms have access to prenatal and postnatal care, children can get regular checkups, and people struggling to put food on the table can still see a doctor before minor issues become emergencies. It means those in rural areas, often far from major hospitals, can visit clinics, access telehealth services, or get prescriptions filled without having to travel hours for basic preventative care. In New York, expanding Medicaid has given over 1 million people access to care. With this bill, New York will face billions of dollars in new costs, while other states could see their expansions repealed entirely. This will cost every single state in this country dearly, both financially and in the human cost. I cannot understand why members of this majority would rip life-saving care away from their constituents in the name of tax breaks for billionaires. It's unconscionable. As an occupational therapist myself, I've worked with patients, young and old, people who rely on Medicaid for necessary care. Without access to care, our healthcare system will become destabilized, and these same patients will suffer. And for those not on Medicaid, who can afford private health insurance, they'll be sent back to the bad old days, forced to deal with overcrowded emergency rooms, more expensive premiums, higher copays, and more costly deductibles. Everybody gets hurt. In the meantime, hospitals, nursing homes, and community health centers will close. Congressional Republicans are forcing families to choose between life-saving medicine and going hungry. And they're putting lives at risk. This Republican bill shifts the burden to states, to hospitals, and to the people who can least afford it. It's an attack on the American people. It makes Americans less safe and healthcare less accessible. Healthcare is a human right, not a luxury reserved for the few. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I'll be voting no on this big, ugly bill. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Representative Clyde, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appear before you today to testify in support of my amendment to eliminate the tax registration requirements for suppressors and short-barreled firearms under the National Firearms Act. House Republicans have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to deliver real conservative constitutional change in Washington. This Congress has laid out bold priorities for President Trump's one big, beautiful bill, including tax relief for working families and small businesses, major investments in border security, strengthening our military, and unleashing American energy. Yet we also have a rare opportunity to restore significant Second Amendment freedoms. For 91 years, yes, 91 years, the National Firearms Act has unjustly subjected American gun owners to unconstitutional infringements on our Second Amendment freedoms. When I came to Washington, I promised to not only protect and defend my constituents' Second Amendment rights, but to restore these God-given freedoms that have been taken from us. Removing the National Firearms Act taxation and registration of suppressors and short-barreled firearms provides a tremendous step towards achieving this critical goal. That's why for months I've led the fight to ensure that we deliver as many pro-2A wins, pro-Second Amendment wins in the budget reconciliation as possible. I successfully added a provision to the House-passed bill to eliminate the unconstitutional taxation and registration for suppressors under the draconian National Firearms Act. I then worked closely with my Senate Republicans to go a step further by eliminating both the National Firearms Act taxation and registration requirements for short-barreled firearms as well. However, the unelected Senate parliamentarian struck this provision down, erroneously claiming that it violated the Byrd Rule. I vehemently disagree with her, and I believe many of her rulings prove she's incapable of making sound, nonpartisan decisions. Let me be perfectly clear. The taxation and registration under the National Firearms Act are inseparably linked. The registration database is the method used by the government to account for the tax paid on each firearm by the serial number of the firearm. And I'd like to show you something. This is an example right here of the tax stamp itself, for any of you who want to look at it, all right? This is a tax stamp from an actual Form 4, National Firearms Act, NFA, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, Form 4. And it says right here, submit the appropriate tax payment, and we will affix the National Firearms Act stamp. And this is the stamp right here. As you can see, it has a serial number on it. This is actually the serial number of the firearm for which the tax was paid. And you have the date, 9/11/2022, and then you have another one right here, a different serial number for a different transfer tax, and another one, and another one, and another one. All of them, you see, are a National Firearms Act tax. Now you have two taxes. You have one that's a $5 tax, and then you have one that's a $200 tax, depending upon the type of firearm. In this particular case, it's a $200 tax. Therefore, if you have no tax, you have no foundation for the registration database. Despite this fact, the unelected Senate parliamentarian determined that the pro-Second Amendment provision in the Senate bill was not budget-related and therefore violated the Byrd Rule. This is simply false. Her ruling was flat out wrong. The tax stamp right here is clear evidence that you have a serial number of a firearm used to document the registration and the tax on the form itself. While I still believe eliminating the taxation of these firearms takes an impressive chunk out of the infringement caused by the National Firearms Act and sets up a strong foundation to challenge the registration requirements in court, I never want to rely on the courts. I believe we can and must do more. That's why I've introduced this amendment, which reinserts the Second Amendment victories the American people demand and deserve. My amendment would ensure the Senate has another opportunity to consider my common sense provision to remove these firearms from the tax database of the National Firearms Act. This amendment gives us another chance to eliminate the 91-year-old taxation and registration of suppressors and short-barreled firearms, championing Americans' Second Amendment liberties instead of tolerating the partisan, unelected Senate parliamentarians' illogical ruling. The American people are demanding that we fight, and my amendment ensures that the fight lives on. I urge this committee to make my amendment in order to restore Americans' Second Amendment rights, and I look forward to taking any questions. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Clyde. Representative Frost, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. This is truly, I believe, an evil bill that should never become law. The single largest transfer of wealth from the working poor and the working class to the ultra-rich, billionaires, and mega corporations in this nation's history. And I don't understand why anyone would vote for it, at least anyone that's read it. And of course, after this passed the House last time, a few Republican members came out to admit that they didn't read the full bill. Well, I did, and this list of unacceptable policies I think are important to bring up, things that we should definitely strike. I mean, this bill is big and is evil. taking away health care coverage from nearly 17 million people, 11.8 million people who would lose their care due to cuts on Medicaid, approximately 5 million people who would lose their care due to Republicans sabotaging the Affordable Care Act. And in Florida alone, more than 1.9 million people could lose their health care. Children eligible for the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, will be out of coverage and have annual and lifetime limits set on their care. Organizations Planned Parenthood is defunded, leaving many people with nowhere to go for cancer screenings and prenatal care. Hundreds of billions of dollars will be cut from Medicare, reducing access to care for seniors. States will be stripped of the ability to raise funding to provide health care to their lowest income residents. Hospitals and nursing homes will be closed, especially those in rural and underserved communities. In fact, studies show 1 in 4 nursing homes will be forced to shut down. Nursing homes will be less safe by dramatically reducing staffing and safety standards by closing 338 rural hospitals and 579
have to pay on their loans that they have been defrauded on by these for-profit monstrosities, Madam Chair. And I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, members of the committee. I honestly can't believe that I'm sitting here today again to try to convince my Republican colleagues that it's immoral to sell off the health of the American people in order to cut taxes for multimillionaires and billionaires. But that's exactly what the Republicans' big, beautiful bill does. Unfortunately, the Republicans' budget is even worse than the last time I sat here before this committee and pleaded with the Republicans to not make the largest cut to Medicaid in our nation's history and upend our nation's healthcare system. But here we are discussing this bill yet again, and the cuts are even bigger, and the impact on our healthcare will be even worse. The Republicans' budget is a betrayal of the American people. It is the largest cut to Medicaid in our nation's history, $1.1 trillion in healthcare cuts. It will kick 17 million Americans off their health insurance. It will force hospitals to shut down. It will force nursing homes to shut down. It will restrict access to reproductive health care. It will increase health care costs. It will increase premiums. It will increase out-of-pocket costs. It will make more families go bankrupt from medical debt. It will cripple our nation's health. And that's not even getting into any of the rest of the disaster of this bill. The largest cut to food assistance in our nation's history, killing more jobs in one single bill than ever before in history, increasing consumer energy costs, raising property taxes in all 87 counties of my home state, exploding the national debt. The list goes on. But I'm a doctor, and I'm thinking about people's health, and today I want to talk about the unconscionable disaster this bill is for Americans' health and our nation's healthcare system. One thing I want every single American to know is that even if you don't use Medicaid, even if you don't know anyone who uses Medicaid, the Republican budget will affect you too. It doesn't matter what insurance you have when your local hospital closes. And with this budget, hospitals will close, clinics will close. This will be a catastrophe for all of us. We will all have less access to health care. It's incredibly dangerous. But I don't want us to lose sight of the human impact of this. As this bill gets closer to becoming the law of the land, I can't stop thinking about my patients. I see their faces, the faces of the mothers and the families I've taken care of who got their health insurance through Medicaid. Do they not matter? Are they somehow less important? Where are they supposed to go to get health care? 80 million Americans get their health insurance through Medicaid. Almost half of all American children get their coverage through Medicaid. What are you doing? Where is your humanity? What is the most chilling and soul-crushing part of this entire process is that the Republican majority doesn't care. They don't care. And this isn't speculative. It isn't being presumptuous or guessing about their intentions. They are literally telling us. The Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, called gutting Medicaid minutia and kicking millions of Americans off their health insurance immaterial. Republican Senator Mitch McConnell said Americans who are concerned about losing Medicaid will, quote, get over it. Republican Senator Joni Ernst defended the life-threatening gutting of Medicaid by saying, well, we're all going to die. As we sit here today, I am outraged by what Republicans are doing to future generations. I never want to hear Republicans say that they are the party of families ever again. Half of all children in the United States of America get their health care coverage through Medicaid. 1 in every 4 children in the United States of America get food assistance through SNAP. Republicans are taking away health care and food from our children in order to prioritize billionaires and perpetuate wealth inequality. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's unconscionable. We haven't even begun to unpack all the ways in which this bill is a moral abomination and honestly an embarrassment of a piece of legislation. If you were serious about putting together a good budget for the American people, you wouldn't try to shove it through on an artificial deadline. You wouldn't force debate through the dark cover of night. You wouldn't vote on it without even reading the text of the bill. But the Republican majority is just unquestioningly doing the president's bidding. They have ceded all of their power to the president, who is beholden to his billionaire class. The more the American people learn about this bill, the more they hate it. You've seen the polls, you've received the calls and emails. You know the American people don't want it. That's why I'm submitting an amendment to scrap the whole bill. Listen to the people you were sent here to represent. So let's start over, write a bill for the American people, not the billionaires. Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Amo, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member and distinguished members of this committee. Look, we all know the saying. We've heard it a bunch of times today, probably. Budgets are a statement of values. You know, this has guided me through this process, this long process that we've been on, and a big, bad process I think it's been. 126 days ago in February, 82 days ago in April, and 40 days ago in May, the House voted on some form of this Republican scheme that would take the health care and food assistance away from millions to pay for tax breaks for the rich. Republican members in this chamber have had opportunity after opportunity to debate